It was past midnight, and I was exhausted. I told myself I'd only do one more ride before going home, but then my phone buzzed. New request. I stared at it in confusion and disbelief. A pickup in the middle of nowhere, no name, no photo, just a single word in the notes. Hurry! It was a long drive to the pickup spot, an old gas station on the edge of the Nevada desert. The place was completely empty. No cars, no lights, just a flickering sign and a cold, dry wind. I checked the app. Arrived. Nobody came out. I sighed, tapping my fingers on the wheel, probably a prank. But just as I reached to cancel the ride, knock, knock. I jumped. A man stood outside my car. Dusty clothes, wide, panicked eyes. Sweating even though the night was freezing. I unlocked the doors and he slid into the back seat. He didn't buckle up, didn't say hello, just turned and stared at the road behind us. Where you headed? I asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. Drive. Something about him felt wrong. I hesitated, but then I saw his hands. They were shaking. Bad. Like he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. I swallowed and pulled onto the road. I told myself I was just giving some scared guy, a soft white, a ride, but like deep down I knew this was a mistake. For the first few minutes he didn't say a word, just kept looking behind us, like checking the mirrors. Then suddenly he spoke. They know I left. My stomach dropped. I glanced at him through the mirror. Who? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward and said my name, then my birthday, my home address, my mother's name. My hands went cold. I slammed the brakes. Who the hell are you? The man swallowed hard. His breath was shaky. I worked inside, deep inside. Area 51. A heavy silence filled the car. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. They weren't studying aliens, he whispered. They were containing something else, something worse. The air in the car felt tight. My grip on the wheel stiffened. I wanted to kick him out, call the cops, get as far away from him as possible. But I didn't, because deep down I wanted to know more. The road stretched out in front of us, and it was dark. The only sound was the hum of the engine. My hands were tight on the wheel. I glanced at the man in the mirror. His face was pale. His lips were dry and cracked. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. What do you mean, something worse? I finally asked. He hesitated. Then in a low, shaky voice, he said, Have you ever heard of a false reality? I frowned. What? He swallowed hard. A thing that isn't real, but thinks it is. A mistake in the world. I let out a nervous laugh. Like a glitch? His eyes locked onto mine in the mirror. Exactly. A shiver ran down my spine. He rubbed his face and took a deep breath. Years ago, we found something buried deep under Area 51. Not a spaceship, not an alien. Something, broken. It could copy people, places, memories, but never perfectly. I felt a lump in my throat. It would replace things, he continued. A road here, a building there, even people. But the details would be wrong. Like a street that suddenly doesn't lead where it used to. A face you swear you recognize but can't remember from where. I felt my skin crawl. He looked down at his shaking hands. We thought we could contain it. We were wrong. I turned my eyes back to the road. Suddenly something felt off. I couldn't place it at first. But then I noticed the road signs. They were blank. No names, no arrows, just empty metal rectangles shining in my headlights. My stomach tightened. I had driven this highway hundreds of times. The signs had names before. Right? The man in the back seat let out a slow breath. But before I could worry about what was happening in front of me, he went full-on panic mode. They're already here. The blood drained from my face. I glanced at the man in the mirror. His fists were clenched. His whole body was tense, like a rabbit frozen before a wolf attack. What do you mean, they? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Then I saw them. Headlights. A pair of bright white beams flared to life behind us, far down the empty road. The car had been sitting there, completely dark, like it had been waiting for us to pass. Now it was moving, fast. The man in my back seat sucked in a sharp breath. They found me. The car behind us was gaining, tires screeching against the pavement. Then, more lights. 1, 2, 3 more cars. My heart pounded. Who are they? The man leaned forward. Mercenaries, private hit squads. Area 51 cleans up its messes. I gritted my teeth. Why the hell are they chasing us? His voice was shaky. Because I know the truth, and no one leaves with the truth. A voice came through my phone's speakers, deep and robotic. Slow down and pull over. I nearly jumped. I hadn't answered a call. The screen was black. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. That's them, isn't it? The man didn't answer. He just grabbed the back of my seat and shouted, "Drive!" I floored it. The engine roared as I pushed the car to its limit. The speedometer climbed 60, 70, 80 miles per hour, but the headlights behind us weren't getting any smaller. Then, bang! A bullet shattered my back windshield. I ducked instinctively, swerving onto the shoulder. The man in the back grabbed his head, panting. They're trying to box us in. I looked ahead. A black SUV had appeared in front of us. It had no license plate, no markings, just tinted windows and reinforced bumpers. I glanced at the rearview mirror. One of the cars behind us had its high beams flashing in a pattern. They weren't just trying to kill us, they were signaling each other. I had no idea how I got dragged into this, no idea how I was going to survive. But one thing was clear, something was very wrong about the situation I was in. Everything went quiet. The mercenaries were still closing in, but then they just stopped. The cars behind us, gone. The SUV in front of us, it faded into the night like a ghost. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. What the hell just happened? The man in the back seat didn't say anything. He was staring at the windshield, his hands gripping the seat like he was holding onto the last shred of reality. I turned around. What happened? Where did they go? He took a slow, shaky breath. It's over. For now. I didn't feel relieved. If anything, the silence felt worse. I could see the panic in his eyes. What's going on? Who were they? What do you mean, for now? He swallowed hard and looked out the window. They're coming for me. The government, they know. I let it out. I stared at him, confused. Let what out? He closed his eyes and took another breath. It's not aliens. It's not some creature. It's a ball. A piece of newly discovered matter that shouldn't exist. We found it in the Earth's atmosphere, and we captured it with technologies you couldn't even imagine. It was contained. At first, I felt my stomach drop. A ball of matter? What does it do? His voice trembled as he spoke. It's like a glitch in reality. A ball of matter that breaks things. It can stretch space, time, and memories, twisting them. When we brought it in, it was contained. But I made a mistake. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What mistake? He looked at me with wide eyes, full of regret. It got out of control. It broke through the walls of Area 51. It's already spread, not just through the base, but beyond. It's already changing everything around us. I felt my heart skip a beat. Wait, so the mercenaries and the cars? That was all... What? He rubbed his face, exhausted. Those were agents from Area 51, trained mercenaries. They were sent to capture me or kill me. I'm the one who let it spread, and now they'll either make me fix it or dispose of me for good. I looked at the empty road in front of us, trying to make sense of what he was saying. The quiet, dark desert was still. Too still. So, the government wants you to fix it? He nodded, his eyes hollow. They want me to stop the ball before it spreads any further, but they also want me to pay for what I did. Either way, I'm not getting out of this. I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. So what do we do now? He turned his gaze to the sky, staring at the stars. We run, but it won't be enough. Nothing will be enough. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty, like everything had stopped, but still, the world outside seemed to hum. We were driving through a desert, and yet somehow nothing made sense anymore. My headlights illuminated nothing but endless night, but the glow never seemed to fade, like we were trapped in some dark loop. I glanced over at the passenger. His face had gone pale. eyes wide and unfocused. He was staring ahead, as if he was seeing something I couldn't. He wasn't breathing. I tried to speak, but the words felt wrong, like they were never supposed to leave my mouth. They didn't sound real. Nothing felt real. "Hey," I whispered, reaching out. What's happening? Are we stuck in some kind of loop?" The passenger didn't answer. He was shaking, his lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned back to the road. I couldn't remember how long we'd been driving. Hours? Days? The clock on the dashboard hadn't moved in what felt like forever. Click. The sound of my blinker made me jump. I looked at the dashboard. The time had shifted. It now read 3:03 a.m., but seconds before, it had read 2:58 a.m., and yet it didn't feel like it had changed at all. I hit the brakes. Nothing moved. I reached for the gear shift. Still nothing. The desert outside hadn't changed. Same cacti, same black sky. The road stretching on into nothing, twisting like it had no end. The same sound of my tires spinning against the asphalt. The same everything. I opened my mouth to speak, but it was like my voice didn't exist. A strange pressure was building in the air, a heaviness like the atmosphere was collapsing in on itself. Then, in a sudden flash, the world reset. The road in front of me, which had stretched endlessly, now looped back on itself. The headlights blinked. Once, twice, and the view ahead became a darkened mirror of what we had just passed. We were back where we started. I slammed the wheel, desperate for control, but the car barely moved. It felt like I was pushing against something unseen, a force that didn't allow me to leave this loop. My breath came faster, my hands growing slick with sweat. "No," I whispered. "No, this can't be happening." The passenger turned his head toward me slowly, his eyes hollow. His lips barely moved, but the words that came out were louder than anything I'd ever heard. "You can't escape. None of us can." I recoiled. What was he talking about? I looked around. The road, the desert, it was all the same, unchanging. Then I looked back at the passenger, and he wasn't there anymore. The seat beside me was empty. I froze, staring at the empty seat, my heart thumping in my chest. The air felt heavier now, as if it were pressing in on me from all sides. I turned to look back out the window, but there was nothing there, not a single star, no landscape, just an overwhelming black void. The time on the dashboard flickered, changing again. 3:03, 3:03, 3:03. It kept looping. The seconds kept resetting. I reached for the door handle, trying to open it. Nothing happened. It wouldn't budge. The windows, the locks, they were all frozen. I started banging on the steering wheel, pounding my fists into the dashboard, desperately trying to get out. I wasn't breathing anymore. My chest was tight, like I was suffocating. My heart slammed against my ribs. The world was closing in. Then the passenger was back, but it wasn't the same. He was distorted. His body was flickering, like he was glitching in and out of existence, his form warping in ways I couldn't comprehend. His voice was distorted, too. It didn't sound human, like it was coming from everywhere at once. "You're losing it, aren't you?" he said, his voice warping in and out of sync. "We all are." I didn't respond. My brain couldn't keep up. The words weren't making sense. My eyes darted from him to the dashboard and back again, but nothing seemed to be consistent. Everything was breaking apart. "We're stuck in time, man. The ball is affecting us. It's spreading beyond Area 51. His eyes were dark, hollow, like he wasn't really seeing me anymore. He wasn't seeing anything at all. It was like he was a projection. His form shimmered, like a bad connection on a video call. I reached for him, but my hand passed right through his arm. He wasn't real, but somehow he was. The car began to shake. The wheels spun faster, 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 until the road beneath us disappeared. We were floating in darkness. I couldn't tell which way was up, which way was down. I grabbed the wheel, but it had become liquid, a shapeless mass that melted through my fingers. I couldn't see the dashboard anymore. Everything was spinning. This is what happens when you mess with reality. The passenger's voice echoed through my head. I closed my eyes, my chest tight, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. And then, the loop reset again. Back to 3:03 a.m., back to the same road. Same headlights, same desert, same car, same passenger, staring at me with those hollow eyes. I couldn't remember if this was the first time it had happened or if it was the 100th or the 1,000th. I couldn't remember if I had ever left. I didn't respond. My brain couldn't keep up. The words weren't making sense. My eyes darted from him to the dashboard and back again, but nothing seemed to be consistent. Everything was breaking apart. We're stuck in time, man. The ball's affecting us. It's spreading beyond Area 51. His eyes were dark, hollow, like he wasn't really seeing me anymore. He wasn't seeing anything at all. It was like he was a projection. His form shimmered like a bad connection on a video call. I reached for him, but my hand passed right through his arm. He wasn't real, but somehow he was. The car began to shake. The wheels spun faster, faster, faster until the road beneath us disappeared. We were floating in darkness. I couldn't tell which way was up, which way was down. I grabbed the wheel, but it had become liquid, a shapeless mass that melted through my fingers. I couldn't see the dashboard anymore. Everything was spinning. This is what happens when you mess with reality. The passenger's voice echoed through my head. I closed my eyes, my chest tight, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. And then, the loop reset again. Back to 3:03 a.m., back to the same road. Same headlights, same desert, same car, same passenger staring at me with those hollow eyes. I couldn't remember if this was the first time it had happened, or if it was the 100th or the 1,000th. I couldn't remember if I'd ever left. The silence was unbearable. Not the kind of silence that comes with an empty road at night, but a complete and unnatural stillness, like sound itself had been erased. Even the engine's hum felt muted, distant, like it wasn't really coming from the car, but from some echo of reality that was barely holding itself together. I tightened my grip on the wheel. My knuckles were white. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the darkness. My headlights shone out, but they didn't seem to illuminate anything new. Just more of the same cracked pavement, the same scattered desert shrubs, the same nothingness. I wasn't sure how long I had been driving. Minutes? Hours? Longer? I swallowed hard, stealing a glance at the passenger. He was sitting stiffly, his face eerily blank, his hands gripping his knees like he was bracing for an impact that had already happened. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. His breathing. Was he even breathing? I checked the dashboard. 3:03 a.m. The numbers didn't change. I blinked hard, trying to shake the growing unease in my chest. Maybe the clock was broken. Maybe I was just too tired to think straight. But something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. The road ahead twisted, curving slightly. But when I turned the wheel, we were back where we started. I gasped. My hands jerked the wheel harder. The car didn't respond. The world around me snapped back like an elastic band, the road resetting in an instant. My headlights still pointed into the void, the same desert stretching endlessly in every direction. I checked the clock again. 3:03 a.m. Again. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Time wasn't moving. "Hey!" I croaked, my voice dry, shaky. "You seeing this?" The passenger twitched. It was the first sign of life I'd seen from him in minutes, maybe longer. His head turned too slowly, like his body had forgotten how to move. His expression was hollow, unreadable. He opened his mouth, but the words came out wrong, muffled, garbled. "What?" I leaned in, straining to hear. This time, he spoke clearer. Too clear. "How long have we been here?" The word sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth to answer, but I didn't know. I couldn't remember. I glanced at the rearview mirror. My reflection wasn't there. I sucked in a sharp breath, twisting in my seat. The back seat was empty. The car felt wrong, like it was missing something, like a place I had never actually been before. I looked back at the passenger. He was staring at me now. His pupils were dilated, his face locked in a half expression of confusion and dread. He was shaking. "Why can't I remember getting in the car?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. I slammed on the brakes. Nothing. The car didn't slow down. The scenery outside didn't change. The road ahead just kept going, stretching infinitely into the void. I yanked the wheel, but the tires had no resistance, like I was gripping a controller in a video game where nothing was real. I gasped for air. My chest was tightening, my vision swimming. "Something's wrong," the passenger muttered, gripping his head. His breathing was getting erratic, panicked. I don't feel right. I don't feel real." A cold shudder ran through me. Neither did I. I checked the clock again. 3:03 a.m. My breath hitched. I twisted the dial on the radio. Static. Every station. I flipped on my phone screen. No service. The battery icon flickered. 95%, 32%, 99%, 0%, before settling at 3:03 a.m. like the clock. The passenger started rocking slightly in his seat, his fingers gripping the sides of his head. I think we're stuck. I think we've been stuck for longer than we can even understand." I swallowed hard. We're just imagining things. There has to be a way out." He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw real horror in his eyes. Yet we've been here long enough to forget what if we've been here forever? My stomach twisted. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words didn't come, because I didn't know if he was wrong. What if we had already been through this? What if we had tried to escape hundreds of times and just couldn't remember? What if time wasn't stuck? What if we were? I gritted my teeth. We have to do something. I threw the car into reverse. The engine roared. The wheels spun, uselessly. The world outside didn't move. The passenger started breathing heavier, his hands gripping his hair. I don't feel like myself. I don't feel real. Then he froze. His whole body went rigid, his eyes glassy. His lips trembled slightly, and then he was gone. I screamed. Not a sound left my throat. I reached out, my fingers clawing at empty air where he had just been. The seatbelt was still buckled. The indentation where he had sat was still there, but he wasn't. I turned wildly in my seat. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice echoing into nothingness. My hands were shaking. The radio crackled. I jerked my head toward it. For a split second, I heard something, a whisper of my own voice, but then click. The world has reset. I was back at the start, hands on the wheel, staring at the same empty road. The passenger was beside me, staring straight ahead, like nothing had happened. I gasped, my whole body trembling. My mind was screaming at me that something was wrong, horribly wrong. I glanced at the dashboard, 3:03 a.m. Again. I wasn't thinking anymore. I couldn't. The loop had broken. The road was gone. The passenger was gone. The world was gone. And in its place, the sphere. A swirling mass of impossible matter stretched beyond sight into the sky, warping space like a hole in the universe. It was never alive, never thinking, just a mistake, a thing that should never have existed, a thing that had already destroyed everything. And yet somehow, I was still here. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel, the last thing I could still feel. The last thing tying me to reality. I made my choice. I pressed the gas pedal as hard as I could. The car lurched forward. The moment it hit the sphere, reality collapsed. Everything fell away. I came back to existence, gasping for air. I hit the ground hard, pain blooming in my ribs. The smell of paper, ink, coffee, normal things flooded my senses. I wasn't in the desert. I wasn't on the road. I was in an office, not just any office, a government office. The walls were lined with monitors, maps, security feeds. The official seal of the United States was printed on a binder sitting inches from my hands. I pushed myself up, heart pounding. I was in the past, the year 2025. And somehow, I was back in the government. I had a desk. I had a role here, as if time itself had shoved me into the perfect position to warn them, to stop this before it began. I worked fast. Within days, I'd clawed my way into high-level meetings. I used whatever power this new version of my life had given me, whatever knowledge I could pull from my fractured mind. The anomaly was still out there. It hadn't been found yet, but it would be soon. The moment the government detected an unidentified energy mass in the upper atmosphere, I pushed harder. Do not engage. Do not retrieve it. Do not bring it to a facility. Containment is impossible. I screamed at them in reports, in classified meetings, in intelligence briefings. I told them everything, what it would do, how it would spread, how it would break time itself. And this time, they listened. They put every research team on alert. They classified the anomaly under the highest security clearance. They marked it as a threat, something that should never be touched. I sat in meeting after meeting, watching them struggle with the knowledge of something so dangerous that the best option was to leave it alone. For years, nothing happened. Decades passed. The anomaly stayed in the sky, just out of reach. And for a long time, I thought I had won. I thought this time was different. Then, in 2038, it happened. New leadership, a shift in priorities, a younger generation of scientists, military strategists, and politicians who hadn't been there for the warnings, people who had only read about it in reports. They started asking questions. What if the warnings were exaggerated? What if the anomaly was a resource rather than a threat? What if there was something to be gained from it? They formed a task force. They reevaluated containment. They ran new tests with better technology, convinced that they could control what their predecessors had feared. And despite everything I had done, despite the warnings I had burned into classified files, despite the meetings I had fought my way into, despite dedicating my entire existence to stopping this exact moment, they sent up a retrieval team. They captured it. They brought it to Area 51. And I realized in that moment that nothing had changed. I sat in my office staring at the final report, my hands shaking. The loop was beginning. Again. It had never mattered what I said. The end was already written. The alarm started soon after. I had stayed too long. I had spoken too much. Someone in the government had caught on. Someone had realized I knew things no one else should. I barely made it out. I stole a key card, slipped past the security checkpoints, ran until I collapsed in the sand. I was somewhere in Nevada, alone in the endless desert, panting under the glow of a setting sun. I reached for my phone, my mind racing. I needed to get away. I needed to disappear. I opened the Uber app. I ordered a ride. And when the driver's name popped up on the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It was me. I had just called an Uber from myself. I stood frozen, staring at the screen. My past self had no idea what was coming, no idea what was about to happen to him, no idea that this was the beginning of everything. I couldn't tell him. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But if I said too much, if I changed anything too drastically, then maybe, just maybe, things would get even worse. I swallowed hard and took a deep breath as headlights appeared in the distance, kicking up dust along the lonely desert road. The car rolled to a stop. The window slid down. And there he was, me, sitting behind the wheel, looking at me through the rearview mirror. You the guy who ordered a ride?" he asked, his voice cautious. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yeah," I said. "Thanks for coming." I climbed into the back seat. The door shut. The car started moving. The road stretched out in front of us, endless and empty. My past self tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, glancing at me through the mirror. "So," he said, "where we headed?" I looked out at the desert, at the stars beginning to flicker in the night sky, at the world that still had no idea what was coming. I couldn't tell him everything. I wouldn't tell him everything, but maybe, just maybe, I could tell him enough. "Just drive," I said. "I'll explain on the way."